She walked into my house, wearing my favorite perfume, holding my husband's hand, and laughed in my face. But she made one fatal mistake. She thought the silence of the woman at the head of the table was weakness. She didn't know that my mother-in-law, the iron-willed matriarch of the Sterling Empire, wasn't just watching, she was waiting. What happens when a mistress crosses the line at the most important family dinner of the decade? Let's just say, dessert wasn't the only thing served cold that night. You won't believe the secret that destroyed a life in 10 seconds flat. The invitation had been specific family only. 7:00 p.m. The estate? For Sarah Sterling, family had meant the people bound by blood and the vows she had taken 10 years ago. It meant her husband, Daniel, his formidable mother, Evelyn, his stoic father, Arthur, and his sharp-tongued sister, Claire. It did not, under any interpretation of the word, include the woman currently standing in the foyer of the Sterling estate, shaking rain off a Burberry trench coat that probably cost more than Sarah's first car. Sarah stood at the top of the mahogany staircase, her hand freezing on the banister. She was wearing a deep navy velvet dress, modest and elegant, the kind Evelyn approved of. Down below, Daniel looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't look ashamed. He looked defiant. And next to him stood Jessica. Jessica was 24, glowing with the kind of youth that felt like a weapon. She had blonde hair that tumbled in perfectly orchestrated waves and was wearing a dress that was a shade of red, so bright it felt violent against the muted creams and golds of the Sterling hallway. "Daniel," Sarah said, descending the stairs slowly, her voice steady despite the thrumming of her heart against her ribs. "You're early." "We wanted to make sure we got a good seat," Jessica chirped, stepping forward before Daniel could speak. She looped her arm through Daniel's, claiming him. "Danny said the traffic would be a nightmare, but I told him, 'Baby, with that car, traffic moves for you.'" She giggled. The sound bounced off the marble floors, sharp and discordant. Sarah reached the bottom of the stairs. She ignored Jessica entirely, locking eyes with her husband. "Daniel, this is the anniversary dinner. It's for your parents' 40th. It is strictly family." Daniel shifted his weight, loosening his tie. He had the grace of a man who had never been told no in his life, but he looked uncomfortable now. "Sarah, look, Jessica is part of my life now. We've been living together for 3 months. It's time everyone stopped pretending she doesn't exist." "We aren't pretending she doesn't exist," Sarah said quietly. "We are respecting the fact that we are still married. The divorce papers aren't even signed." "Daniel, technicalities," Jessica scoffed, examining her manicured nails. "Papers are just paper. Hearts are what matter. Right. Danny." The front door to the drawing room opened. The sound of heavy oak scraping against the floor silenced the hallway. Evelyn Sterling stood in the doorway. At 68, Evelyn was a terrifying figure. She was not the kind of grandmother who baked cookies. She was the kind who orchestrated mergers and acquisitions from her garden room. She wore a charcoal grey suit that looked like armor, and her silver hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull the skin of her face into a permanent expression of judgment. Evelyn's grey eyes swept over Daniel, landed briefly on Sarah, and then settled on Jessica like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Mother," Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly. "I brought Jessica." "I see that," Evelyn said. Her voice was low, devoid of warmth. "I was under the impression you could read. Daniel, the invitation was quite clear. She's my partner, mother, Daniel insisted, though he took a half step back. If she's not welcome, I'm not staying. It was a bluff. Everyone knew it. Daniel needed his allowance from the trust fund to maintain the penthouse Jessica was currently redecorating. Jessica, oblivious to the financial dynamics, stepped forward and extended a hand to Evelyn. Mrs. Sterling, it's so good to finally meet you. Danny talks about you all the time. He says you're scary, but I think you're just misunderstand. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief second. She just called Evelyn Sterling misunderstood. Evelyn looked at the outstretched hand. She did not take it. She merely tilted her head. Dinner is in 20 minutes, Evelyn said. Sarah, darling, help me with the wine selection in the cellar. Daniel, pour yourself a drink. You look like you need the courage. And me? Jessica asked, her hand dropping awkwardly. Evelyn turned her back, walking toward the cellar door. You are here, aren't you? Try not to touch the porcelain. As Sarah followed her mother-in-law into the cool, damp air of the wine cellar, she felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I'm sorry, Evelyn, Sarah whispered as the door clicked shut, blocking out the sound of Jessica's high-pitched complaints upstairs. I didn't know he was bringing her. I would have— Stop, Evelyn snapped, grabbing a bottle of 1982 Bordeaux. She turned to Sarah, her eyes blazing. Do not apologize for the behavior of a fool. Sarah, it makes you look weak, and tonight of all nights, you cannot afford to be weak. Why did you let her stay? Sarah asked. You could have thrown her out. Evelyn dusted off the bottle, a cold, thin smile playing on her lips. Throwing her out makes her a victim. Sarah, it makes Daniel defend her. No, tonight, we let her stay. We let her speak. We let her show us exactly who she is. Evelyn handed the heavy bottle to Sarah. Give a person enough rope, Evelyn murmured, and they will inevitably hang themselves. Tonight, Jessica gets all the rope she wants. The dining room of the Sterling estate was built to intimidate. The table was long enough to seat 20, made of dark, polished walnut that reflected the crystal chandelier above. At the head sat Arthur Sterling, Daniel's father, a man who had lost his hearing years ago, but pretended he hadn't. Mostly so he could ignore conversations he found boring. Evelyn sat at the opposite end. Sarah sat to her right. Daniel sat to her left. And Jessica sat directly across from Sarah, in the seat usually reserved for Claire. Daniel's sister. When Claire had arrived 5 minutes late, seeing her seat taken, she had simply raised an eyebrow, poured herself a double vodka, and sat at the far end of the table, watching the scene like it was a reality TV show she hated but couldn't turn off. The first course was a lobster bisque. The only sound was the clinking of silver spoons against china until Jessica cleared her throat. So, Jessica said, her voice loud enough to startle Arthur. This house is huge, like museum huge. Do you guys actually use all the rooms, or is it just for show? We use the rooms necessary for our lives, Evelyn said, not looking up from her soup. Right. Danny said it's old money, Jessica continued, tearing a piece of bread roll apart with her fingers rather than using the bread plate. I love vintage stuff, but honestly, it smells a little musty in here. Have you guys thought about doing a remodel open concept? Knock down some of these heavy walls? Sarah saw Claire choke on her vodka down the table. These walls, Sarah said softly, trying to de-escalate, are structural, Jessica, and the house is a historical landmark. We can't just knock them down. Jessica rolled her eyes, looking at Daniel. See, she's so rigid. No imagination. That's what I tell Danny all the time. You need fresh energy. She turned her gaze fully on Sarah. It was the first time she had addressed her directly since the foyer. That's actually what I wanted to talk about, Jessica said, leaning forward, her elbows on the table. Fresh energy. Danny says you guys have been married for 10 years. That's correct, Sarah said, placing her spoon down. 10 years. Jessica whistled. And no kids. That's wild. I mean, my mum had 3 of us by the time she was 25. Is it, a plumbing issue? The table went dead silent. Even Arthur seemed to sense the shift in atmospheric pressure. Daniel went pale. Jessica, Daniel hissed. Not now. What? Jessica feigned innocence, blinking her long, false lashes. I'm just asking. I mean, women have a biological clock. Right. And Sarah looks... well, you look great for your age. Sarah, really? But 35 is basically the twilight zone for fertility. I'm just saying. Danny wants an heir. That's important to families like this. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't just an insult. It was a dagger into the deepest wound she carried. They had tried for years. Miscarriages. IVF rounds that failed. It was a pain she carried silently. A pain Daniel knew intimately. And now, this girl, this 24-year-old stranger, was using it as dinner conversation. We have discussed this, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. It's personal. It's not personal if it affects the family legacy, Jessica countered, taking a sip of wine and grimacing. Ugh, this wine is sour. Is it old, anyway? I'm just saying, I'm in my prime. Danny and I have talked about it. I could give him a son within a year. Easy. She looked triumphantly at Evelyn. That's what you want. Right. Mrs. Sterling, a grandson. Someone to carry on the name, Sarah, clearly can't do the job. You shouldn't punish Danny because he upgraded to a model that works. Upgraded to a model that works. The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Claire stood up at the end of the table. You little... Sit down, Claire, Evelyn commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it whipped through the room like a lash. Claire froze, looking at her mother. Mum, you can't let her talk to Sarah like that. I said sit down, Evelyn repeated. She turned her gaze to Jessica. Her expression hadn't changed. She looked bored. Jessica, you find the wine sour? Jessica blinked, surprised by the pivot. Yeah, it tastes like vinegar. It's a 1982 Chateau Margaux, Evelyn said dryly. It requires a refined palate to appreciate, I suppose to a tongue accustomed to sweeter, cheaper blends. It might be challenging. Jessica narrowed her eyes, sensing the insult, but not quite able to pass it. Well, I'm just being honest. I'm a brutally honest person. I don't fake things, unlike some people who fake being happy in a dead marriage. She pointed a manicured finger at Sarah. You know he doesn't love you, right? Jessica said, her voice dropping to a cruel sneer. He pities you. He told me. He said coming home to you is like walking into a funeral home. Everything is so quiet and sad. He needs life. He needs fire. Sarah looked at Daniel. She waited for him to deny it, to slam his fist on the table and tell Jessica to shut up. Daniel looked down at his lobster bisque, swirling it with his spoon. He said nothing. That silence hurt more than anything Jessica had said. So, Jessica continued, emboldened by Daniel's passivity, here's the plan. Danny and I are going to Cabo next week. When we get back, we want the master suite in the East Wing. Sarah can take the guest cottage until the divorce is final. I want to start redecorating the nursery immediately. I'm thinking modern, grey and white. None of this creepy Victorian wood. She looked around the table, a bright, manic smile plastered on her face. Does that work for everyone? Sarah pushed her chair back. The scraping sound was deafening. Excuse me, I need air. Sarah, sit, Evelyn said. Evelyn, please. Sarah begged, tears stinging her eyes. I can't. I said, sit. Evelyn commanded. She reached out and placed her hand over Sarah's trembling hand on the table. Her skin was cool, but her grip was iron. Evelyn turned her head slowly toward Jessica. She picked up her wineglass, swirled the dark red liquid, and took a slow, deliberate sip. You want the master suite, Evelyn said thoughtfully. And you want to carry the sterling air. Exactly. Jessica beamed, thinking she had won. I knew you were smart, Mrs. Sterling. You're a businesswoman. You understand value. I do understand value, Evelyn agreed. She set the glass down. And I also understand liability. Evelyn rang the small silver bell next to her plate. The kitchen door swung open, but it wasn't the servers who walked in. It was Mr. Henderson, the family's longtime lawyer, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He looked apologetic as he walked toward the table, placing the briefcase directly in front of Evelyn. Thank you, Robert, Evelyn said. What's this? Daniel asked, finally looking up. Mother, why is Henderson here on a Sunday? Because, Evelyn said, unclasping the briefcase with a sharp snap. Jessica raised some very interesting points about the future of this family, about heirs, about assets, about who belongs in this house and who does not. Evelyn pulled out a stack of documents. You see, Jessica, Evelyn said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. You made a mistake. You assumed that because Daniel brings you to my table, he has the power to offer you a seat. You assumed that this house, this money, and this legacy belong to him. Evelyn slid a document across the polished walnut table. It stopped perfectly in front of Jessica. He doesn't own any of it, Evelyn said. And neither do I. Jessica looked down at the paper. What is this? Read the name on the deed. Jessica. Evelyn smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that promised carnage. Jessica squinted at the legal text. Her lips moved as she read the name bolded at the top of the trust deed. Sarah Elizabeth Sterling, Jessica read, her voice shaking. She looked up, confusion marring her perfect face. What? Why is her name on the house? Evelyn leaned back in her chair, interlacing her fingers. Because, Evelyn said, Sarah is the only person at this table who has actually earned her place in this family. Here are part 3 and part 4 of the story. Jessica stared at the document, her mouth slightly open. A piece of garnish from the lobster bisque stuck unnoticed to her lower lip. The bold letters, Sarah Elizabeth Sterling, seemed to mock her. I don't get it, Jessica stammered, looking from the paper to Daniel. Danny, what is she talking about? This is the family estate. You're the Sterling heir. Your last name is literally on the mailbox. Daniel was gripping his wine glass so hard his knuckles were white. He wouldn't look at Jessica. He stared straight ahead at the centerpiece of white lilies, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad. Daniel! Jessica's voice rose to a shrill pitch. Tell her she's lying. Tell her this is some kind of sick joke to scare me off. It is no joke, Arthur Sterling spoke up for the first time. His voice was booming. deafening in the quiet room. He adjusted his hearing aid with a grimace. "And stop screeching, young woman. You're disturbing the digestion." Evelyn gestured to the lawyer. "Mr. Henderson. Robert, please explain the current ownership structure of the Sterling assets to our guest. Since she is so interested in the family legacy, she should know exactly what she is trying to marry into." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. He didn't look at Jessica with malice, but with the pity one reserves for a pedestrian about to be hit by a bus. "Certainly. Mrs. Sterling," Henderson said. "5 years ago, the Sterling Corporation faced a liquidity crisis." "A crisis?" Jessica frowned. "Danny said the company made record profits last year." "It did," Henderson nodded, "under the guidance of the current chairwoman, but 5 years ago, Mr. Daniel Sterling, who was acting CEO at the time, made a series of unfortunate speculative investments." "He gambled it," Claire piped up from the end of the table, pouring herself another drink. "Just say it, Robert. He bet the farm on crypto and a tech startup that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. He lost $40 million in 3 months. Jessica gasped, turning to Daniel. "40 million, Danny," Daniel finally snapped. "It was a sure thing. The market crashed. It wasn't my fault. It was entirely your fault," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through his defense like a scalpel. "You leveraged the estate. You leveraged the factory. You leveraged your own parents' retirement accounts without our consent." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Jessica. "We were days away from bankruptcy, Jessica. The banks were coming for the keys to this house, the staff you see here. We were going to have to fire them. The legacy you want to carry, it was ash in Daniel's hands." "So, what happened?" Jessica asked, her voice small. "Sarah happened," Evelyn said, gesturing to the silent woman beside her. Sarah sat straight, her hands folded in her lap. She remembered those days, the panic attacks, the nights she spent going through boxes of financial records while Daniel was out drinking to forget what he'd done. She remembered the meeting with the bank. "Sarah sold her own inheritance," Evelyn continued. "Her grandmother left her a portfolio of modest but stable bonds. She liquidated everything. She sold her jewelry. She took out a personal loan in her own name because Daniel's credit was destroyed. She injected the capital we needed to keep the lights on for 3 months while we restructured. She bought you out," Jessica whispered. "She saved us," Arthur corrected, his voice gruff. "And in exchange, the board of directors, which is to say, Evelyn and myself, voted unanimously to restructure the ownership. To protect the assets from Daniel's recklessness, we transferred the deed of the estate and the majority controlling shares of the company to Sarah." Evelyn smiled, a terrifying, shark-like expression. "You see, Jessica, you called Sarah weak. You mocked her for having no imagination. But while you were likely spending your time learning how to contour your nose, Sarah was learning corporate law while you were shopping for dresses to seduce married men. Sarah was negotiating with creditors to save my husband's life work." Evelyn picked up the deed and tapped it against the table. "Daniel lives here because Sarah allows it. Daniel drives his car because Sarah signs the lease payments. Daniel wears those Italian suits because Sarah approves his monthly stipend." The room fell into a heavy silence. Jessica looked at Daniel with a new expression. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was the look of a shopper realizing the Gucci bag she just bought was a cheap knockoff sold in a back alley. So, Jessica swallowed hard. He's broke. Technically, Mr. Henderson interjected helpfully. Mr. Sterling has a net worth of negative $2 million due to outstanding personal debts that the trust refuses to cover. However, he is employed by the Sterling Corporation as a regional manager. Regional manager, Jessica shrieked. You told me you were the CEO. I am the face of the company, Daniel shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I do the meetings, I do the press. Sarah just sits in the back office. Sarah makes the decisions. Evelyn corrected calmly. You are the mascot, Danielle, and mascots are easily replaced. Jessica pushed her chair back, the legs screeching against the parquet floor. She stood up, her red dress looking suddenly cheap under the chandelier's glare. I need a drink, she muttered. She reached for the wine bottle, but her hand was shaking so badly she knocked over her water glass. The ice water flooded across the table, soaking into the expensive linen tablecloth and dripping onto her lap. Damn it, she screamed, jumping back. Look what you made me do. Sit down, Jessica, Sarah said. It was the first time Sarah had raised her voice all evening. It wasn't a scream. It was a command. It carried the same weight as Evelyn's voice, but with a different texture, younger, but harder. Jessica looked at Sarah, surprised. I said, sit down, Sarah repeated, her eyes cold. We haven't gotten to the main course yet. And Mr. Henderson has one more document to show you. I don't want to see any more papers, Jessica spat, grabbing a napkin to dab at her wet dress. I want to leave. Danny, get the car. We're going. Daniel didn't move. He looked at his mother. Then he looked at Sarah. He looked like a dog that had been kicked too many times. Danny, Jessica yelled. I said let's go. This whole family is crazy. I'm not staying here to be insulted by your frigid wife and your witch of a mother. He can't take you, Sarah said softly. What? Jessica snapped. The car, Sarah said. The Aston Martin you arrived in. The one you said traffic moves for. It's a company vehicle. Sarah picked up her phone and tapped the screen once. Outside, through the large bay windows, the headlights of the Aston Martin flashed twice, and the alarm chirped. Then, the engine-disabled lock engaged. I just revoked his digital key access, Sarah said, placing the phone back on the table. You can call an Uber, Jessica, but Daniel isn't driving anywhere. If silence could kill, the dining room would have been a mass grave. Jessica stood frozen, her napkin clutched in her hand like a surrender flag she refused to wave. She looked at the phone on the table, then at Sarah. The realization that the boring, frigid wife held the keys literally and metaphorically was crashing down on her. You're bluffing, Jessica said, though her voice wavered. You can't just turn off a car. It's a fleet management feature, Sarah explained, taking a sip of the 1982 Margot. For insurance purposes, we can't have unauthorized drivers operating company assets, and since Daniel is currently intoxicated, she glanced at his empty wine glass, and emotionally compromised, it would be negligent of me as the chairwoman to allow him behind the wheel. This is insane, Jessica hissed. She turned to Daniel, grabbing his shoulder and shaking him. Do something, are you a man or a puppet? Tell them to stop. Daniel brushed her hand off. He looked exhausted. The fight had drained out of him the moment the deed hit the table. Jess, just sit down, please. You're making it worse. I'm making it worse. Jessica laughed, a high, hysterical sound. I'm the only one here living in reality. You lied to me. Daniel, you told me you were rich. You told me you were going to buy me a villa in Tuscany. You can't even buy me a Happy Meal without asking your wife for permission. That is essentially correct, Mr. Henderson nodded, pulling another sheaf of papers from his briefcase. Which brings us to the matter of the prenuptial agreement and the trust bylaws. Jessica fell back into her chair, defeated. What now does she own his internal organs? To? Not quite, Evelyn said, slicing her steak which had just been served by the silent, efficient staff who had materialized to clear the soup bowls. But we do have standards. Jessica, the Sterling Trust pays out a monthly stipend to family members to maintain a certain lifestyle. It is a generous amount, enough for penthouses, travel, and yes, even mistresses, usually. Evelyn paused, putting a forkful of steak into her mouth. She chewed slowly, making them wait. However, Evelyn continued, there is a morality clause. A what? Jessica asked. Page 42, paragraph 7, Henderson recited. Not needing to look at the paper. Beneficiaries of the trust must not engage in public behavior that brings scandal, disrepute, or embarrassment to the Sterling name. This includes, but is not limited to, criminal convictions, public intoxication, and a flagrant infidelity that threatens the stability of the family unit. Henderson looked over his glasses at Daniel. Bringing a paramour to the 40th anniversary dinner of the founding members, while still legally married to the chairwoman of the board, has been deemed by the trustees as a Class A violation of the morality clause. What does that mean? Jessica asked, looking between them. It means, Sarah said, her voice steady, that as of 7:15 p.m. tonight, Daniel's access to the family accounts has been frozen. Frozen? Jessica blinked. Like, for the weekend, indefinitely, Sarah said, until he enters a rehabilitation program and demonstrates a recommitment to the family values. So his credit cards, Jessica started, declined, Sarah confirmed. All of them. The Black Amex, the Visa, even the gas card. Jessica turned pale. She reached for her clutch bag, pulling out her phone. She started tapping furiously. What are you doing? Claire asked from the end of the table, leaning forward with a grin. Checking to see if the jewelry he bought you is real. Jessica ignored her. She was checking her banking app. Daniel had transferred $10,000 to her account that morning for their upcoming trip to Cabo. She stared at the screen. Pending transaction cancelled. Insufficient funds / frozen asset. No, Jessica whispered. No. I already put the deposit down on the villa. I'm afraid you'll lose that deposit, Henderson said sympathetically. Jessica dropped her phone. It clattered against the china plate. She looked at Daniel with pure, unadulterated venom. The mask of the doting, loving girlfriend vanished completely. In its place was a woman who realized she had bet on the wrong horse and was currently standing in the stable shoveling manure. You useless idiot, she spat at Daniel. The room gasped, not because of the insult they were thinking it too, but because of the speed of the transformation. Jessica, Daniel pleaded, reaching for her hand. Baby, we can fix this. I can get a job. I have connections. A job, Jessica screeched, pulling her hand away as if he were contagious. I didn't date you so I could be with a guy who has a job. Daniel, I dated you because you were supposed to be the Sterling heir. I'm 24. I have options. I could be on a yacht in Dubai right now. But instead, I'm in a drafty dining room with your freak family, finding out you're a pauper." "So it was just about the money?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking. He looked like a child finding out Santa Claus wasn't real. "You said you loved my soul. You said I was the only one who understood you. Your soul doesn't pay for Prada. Danielle." Jessica screamed. She stood up, grabbing her trench coat from the back of the chair. "I'm done. I am so done. I'm going to call my ex. At least he owns his own landscaping business. It's not millions, but at least he can pay for his own truck." She turned to leave, but Evelyn's voice stopped her cold. "Wait." It was a single word, but it carried the weight of an anchor. Jessica froze. "You aren't leaving just yet," Evelyn said. "We haven't discussed the matter of the heir." Jessica turned back slowly. "What, you want a baby from him?" She gestured dismissively at Daniel. "Good luck. I'm not carrying a broke baby." "Oh, we don't want your child," Evelyn said, wiping her mouth with her napkin. "God forbid. Imagine the genetic combination of Daniel's spine and your intellect. It would be a disaster." Evelyn stood up. She was not a tall woman, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over the room. "You insulted my daughter-in-law earlier," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You mocked her for not giving us a child. You called her a broken model. You said you could do better." Evelyn walked around the table until she stood directly in front of Jessica. "You assumed that the only value a woman has in this family is her womb," Evelyn said. "How pitifully archaic." Evelyn placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "This family does not need more children. Jessica, we have enough legitimate heirs in the extended cousins to fill a boarding school. What this family needs is leadership. What we need is intelligence. What we need is loyalty." Evelyn looked down at Sarah with a rare expression of genuine affection. "Sarah isn't the broken model. Sarah is the engine. She is the reason the Sterling name still means something. She is the daughter I never had, and the son Daniel failed to be." Evelyn turned back to Jessica, her eyes hardening into diamonds. "And you," Evelyn scoffed. "You are just a budget line item we are about to delete. But before you go, there is one final thing." Evelyn nodded to Henderson. "The NDA," Henderson said, pulling a single thin sheet of paper from the briefcase. "I'm not signing anything," Jessica said defiantly, buttoning her coat. "I'm going to tell everyone about this. I'm going to go to the press. I'll tell them the Sterlings are broke." "We aren't broke," Evelyn corrected. "Daniel is broke. We are quite wealthy. And if you go to the press, or post one word of this on your little social media accounts, we will sue you for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and theft." "Theft?" Jessica laughed. "I didn't steal anything. The diamond earrings you're wearing." Sarah spoke up. "Daniel charged them to the corporate account last week, under the label Client Gifts." Jessica's hand flew to her ears. "That is technically embezzlement," Henderson noted. "And since you are in possession of stolen goods, you are an accessory. The value is over $10,000. That's a felony. Miss Jessica. Mandatory prison time." Jessica went white. "However," Sarah continued, standing up and walking over to Jessica. She held out the pen. "If you sign this non-disclosure agreement, agreeing to never speak of this family, never contact Daniel again, and never set foot within 10 miles of this estate, we might forget to file the police report." Sarah held out her hand, palm open. "The earrings." Jessica looked at the pen. then at the earrings, then at the terrified face of Daniel, who was crying silently into his hands, with trembling fingers. Jessica unclasped the diamond earrings. She dropped them into Sarah's hand. They felt heavy and cold. She snatched the pen and scribbled her name on the paper so hard she tore the page. "There!" Jessica spat. "Are you happy?" "Ecstatic," Evelyn said. "Now, get out of my house!" Jessica spun around and marched toward the door, her heels clicking loudly. She didn't look back at Daniel. She slammed the heavy oak door behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't tense anymore. It was the silence of a storm that had just passed. "Well," Claire said, picking up her fork. "Who wants dessert?" But the drama wasn't over, because as the front door closed, Daniel slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red, rimmed with desperation and a sudden, terrifying realization. He was alone, truly alone, and he was sitting next to the woman who owned his life. "Sarah," Daniel whispered, reaching out a trembling hand toward his wife. "Sarah, please. She meant nothing. I was confused. I'm so sorry." Sarah looked down at her husband's hand. She didn't take it. Instead, she turned to Evelyn. "Evelyn," Sarah said, her voice calm but resolute. "I think it's time we discussed the guest cottage." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yes," Sarah said, looking back at Daniel. "I think Daniel will be very comfortable there. Until the divorce is final." Daniel gasped. "Divorce Sarah. No, you can't. The morality clause, I'll be destitute." "Yes," Sarah said, picking up her wine glass and toasting him. "You will be. But don't worry. Daniel, I'm not cruel." She took a sip, her eyes flashing with a new, dangerous light. "I'm sure I can find you a position in the company. We need a new night shift supervisor at the warehouse. Minimum wage, of course. We have to watch the bottom line." The transition from the velvet-lined chairs of the Sterling dining room to the concrete floor of the Sterling Logistics Distribution Center was, for Daniel, a descent into hell. It had been 3 weeks since the anniversary dinner. 3 weeks since Jessica had peeled out of the driveway in an Uber X, leaving a streak of tire rubber and a cloud of cheap perfume behind her. 3 weeks since Sarah had packed Daniel's belongings into 4 cardboard boxes, not the Louis Vuitton trunks, but literal cardboard boxes from the recycling bin, and had them delivered to the guest cottage. But the cottage was a luxury compared to his new 9-to-5. "Move it!" "Sterling," the shift supervisor bellowed. His name was Mike. He was a man with a neck thick as a tree trunk and absolutely zero patience for former private school boys who didn't know how to operate a tape gun. "That shipment for the Midwest region is due on the truck in 20 minutes. Stop staring at your hands." Daniel looked down at his hands. They were blistered. His manicure was a distant memory, replaced by jagged nails and grime that wouldn't scrub off no matter how hard he tried. He was wearing a neon yellow safety vest over a generic grey polo shirt. "I'm going as fast as I can." "Mike." Daniel grunted, lifting a heavy box of engine parts. His back screamed in protest. "Not fast enough." Mike spat. "You think because your last name is on the sign outside, you get a pass. The chairwoman was very specific. No special treatment. You're late again. You're docked." The chairwoman. Sarah. Daniel felt a hot spike of shame in his gut. He hadn't seen Sarah since that night. She communicated exclusively through Mr. Henderson. Every request for a meeting was denied. Every text message went unanswered. He was ghosted by his own wife, who lived 300 yards away in the main house while he shivered in the cottage with a radiator that clanked like a dying engine. At lunch break, Daniel sat on a wooden pallet outside the loading bay, eating a sandwich he had to make himself. It was soggy. He pulled out his phone. He had unblocked Jessica's number 3 days ago, desperate for any connection to his old life. He knew it was a violation of the spirit of the agreement, but he needed to hear her voice. He needed her to tell him that she loved him, not the money. He dialed. It rang once. Then, voicemail. You've reached the voicemail of Jessica. If you're calling about the booking for the Dubai trip, DM me on Insta. He hung up. Dubai. He opened Instagram. There she was, posted 2 hours ago. Jessica, in a white bikini, holding a champagne flute, leaning against the railing of a yacht. The caption read, #blessed, #new beginnings, #upgrade. In the reflection of her sunglasses, Daniel could see a man. He was older, balding, and wearing a heavy gold watch. Daniel felt like he was going to vomit. She hadn't just left him. She had replaced him before the ink on the NDA was even dry. The love she spoke of at the dinner table was as artificial as her eyelashes. Pathetic, isn't it? Daniel jumped. He hadn't heard the luxury sedan pull up. Sarah was standing 10 feet away. She wasn't wearing the modest navy dress anymore. She was wearing a tailored white pantsuit, sharp and modern. She wore a white, hard hat, holding a clipboard. She looked like a CEO. She looked powerful. Sarah. Daniel scrambled to his feet, wiping crumbs off his vest. I didn't know you were inspecting today. I inspect every Tuesday, Sarah said coolly, not stepping closer. Mike tells me your performance is adequate. Barely. It's hard work, Sarah, Daniel said, his voice cracking. I'm not built for this. Look at my hands. He held them out. Seeking pity, Sarah looked at his blistered palms. She didn't flinch. My father worked in a factory for 30 years. Daniel, she said. He had arthritis by the time he was 40. He never complained once. He did it to put food on the table. You're doing it to pay off a debt you incurred by trying to bankrupt my family. Our family, Daniel corrected weakly. No. Sarah shook her head. Not anymore. I filed the papers this morning. The air left Daniel's lungs. Divorce, Sarah. Please, I'm learning. I'm suffering. Doesn't that count for something I can change? You aren't changing. Daniel, Sarah said, stepping closer, her voice lowering so the other workers couldn't hear. You're just enduring. You're waiting for the punishment to be over so you can go back to being the spoiled prince. You don't miss me. You miss the access. That's not true. I love you. Do you? Sarah asked. Her eyes searched his face, looking for a trace of the man she had married 10 years ago. Then tell me, Daniel, if you loved me, why did you lie to me for 10 years about the one thing I wanted more than anything? Daniel froze. His face went from flushed to ghostly pale in a second. I don't know what you're talking about. The medical records, Sarah whispered. I have full power of attorney now. Remember, I was reviewing the insurance files from 5 years ago. The urologist's report. Daniel stepped back, hitting the brick wall of the warehouse. You knew, Sarah said, her voice trembling with a rage she was barely containing. Jessica mocked me for being barren. She called me a broken model. And you sat there and let her tear me apart for not giving you a child, when you knew the whole time that you are sterile. The silence between them was louder than the forklifts beeping in the distance. I didn't want to lose you," Daniel whispered. "I knew if you found out I couldn't give you a family, you'd leave. You always wanted to be a mother. So I let you think it was you. I let you take the shots. I let you cry every month." Sarah's hand flew up and slapped him. It was a sharp, cracking sound that made Mike, the supervisor, look over from the loading dock. "You let me hate my own body for a decade," Sarah hissed, tears finally spilling over. "That isn't love, Daniel. That is torture." She turned on her heel, walking back to her car. "Sarah, wait!" Daniel yelled. "Get back to work! Sterling!" Mike shouted from the dock. "Break's over." Daniel looked at his wife driving away in the car he used to drive, then back at the dark, gaping more of the warehouse. He sank down onto the pallet, putting his head in his dirty hands, and wept. 3 months later. The divorce proceedings were in their final stages. It was a rainy Tuesday in November. Sarah sat in the conference room of her lawyer's office, staring at the rain streaking the glass. The discovery of Daniel's medical deception had hardened her. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, efficient fury. She wasn't just taking the house, she was taking his dignity. The settlement offered him a small studio apartment in the city and a modest allowance, contingent on his continued employment at the warehouse. Arthur and Evelyn had supported her entirely. In fact, Evelyn had suggested cutting the allowance in half. Knock, knock. Sarah turned. It was Mr. Henderson. He looked uncharacteristically flustered. He was clutching a file folder to his chest. "Robert, is everything okay? Did Daniel sign the final decree?" "He was about to," Henderson said, closing the door behind him and locking it. "But we have a complication." "What kind of complication?" "A visitor," Henderson said. "In the lobby. She refuses to leave. She says she has information that changes the terms of the divorce." Sarah frowned. "Who?" "Jessica." Sarah stood up. "She signed an NDA. She's not allowed within 10 miles of me." "She knows that," Henderson said. "But she says the NDA is void if criminal activity is involved. She's threatening to go to the tabloids with a story about how the Sterling family is abusing her." "Abusing her," Sarah scoffed. "We haven't spoken to her in months. She says—" Henderson hesitated, his face turning a shade of crimson. "She says she is pregnant with the Sterling heir." Sarah stared at him. Then a slow, dark smile spread across her face. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of a hunter who just realized the prey had walked directly into a trap. "Bring her in," Sarah said. "Sarah, are you sure?" Henderson asked. "It could be a scene." "Oh, I'm counting on it," Sarah said. Sitting back down at the head of the table, "Bring her in and record it." 5 minutes later, Jessica waddled into the conference room. She was wearing a baggy sweater that emphasized a very distinct bump. She wasn't wearing the glamorous red dress this time. She looked tired. Her roots were showing, and she was carrying a fake Birkin bag. She sat down opposite Sarah, not waiting for an invitation. "Sarah," Jessica nodded, trying to regain some of her old arrogance. "You look tired." "I'm busy running a multinational corporation," Sarah said calmly. "Something you wouldn't understand." "What do you want?" "Jessica, you're violating a court order." "I want $5 million, Jessica said flatly. "And the guest house, and child support, $10,000 a month." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And why, exactly, would I give you that?" Jessica placed a hand on her belly. "Because of this. I'm 4 months pregnant. It's a boy. Daniel's son." She reached into her bag and pulled out a grainy ultrasound photo, sliding it across the table. "I did the math," Jessica said, her voice gaining confidence. "It happened the week before the dinner, before you cut him off, before the NDA. This baby is a sterling, and you know what that means. He has a claim to the trust. If you don't pay me, I'm going to sue for paternity. I'll drag this family through every newspaper in the country. Cruel widow-to-be denies husband's only son." Great headline. Right. Sarah picked up the ultrasound. She studied it for a moment. "You're right," Sarah said. "A sterling heir would have a claim. The trust is very specific about biological lineage." Jessica smirked. "I knew you'd see reason. You can't beat biology. Sarah, I won. I have the one thing you couldn't give him." Sarah put the photo down. She looked at Henderson. "Robert, get Daniel on the video conference. Now." "Daniel?" Jessica frowned. "Why? He should hear the good news," Sarah said sweetly. A moment later, the large screen on the wall flickered to life. Daniel appeared. He was in the warehouse break room, wearing his neon vest, looking haggard and confused. "Sarah," Daniel asked, "what's going on? Is the divorce final?" "Not yet," Sarah said. "We have a guest. Jessica is here." Daniel squinted at the screen. "Jessica." "Hi, Danny." Jessica waved at the camera, putting on a pouty face. "I miss you. And look." She stood up and turned to the side, accentuating the bump. "We're having a baby." Daniel stared. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "It's a boy." "Daniel," Jessica cried. "Our son, I'm doing this for us. Sarah has to pay us now. We can be a family." Daniel didn't look happy. He looked horrified. He looked at Sarah on the screen, his eyes pleading. "Tell her," Sarah commanded Daniel. "Tell me what—" Jessica snapped. "Daniel," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "Tell her why she is lying." Daniel swallowed hard. "Jessica, that's not my baby." "Of course it is," Jessica yelled. "We were sleeping together every night. I wasn't with anyone else." "It doesn't matter," Daniel whispered. It's medically impossible." "What are you talking about?" Jessica laughed nervously. "Nothing is impossible." "I had a vasectomy," Daniel blurted out. 6 years ago." The room went dead silent. Jessica froze, her hand still resting on her bump. "What?" she whispered. "I had a vasectomy," Daniel repeated, his voice stronger now, fueled by the realization of Jessica's betrayal. "After I lost the money, I was terrified of having kids I couldn't afford. I had it done in secret. I never told Sarah. I never told anyone. But I am sterile. Jessica. 100%. I have the medical records to prove it." Jessica's face crumbled. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the panic of a con artist caught mid-heist. "No," she stammered. "No. The doctors can be wrong. It happens, spontaneous healing." "Not with the procedure I had," Daniel said grimly. "So, whoever that baby belongs to, maybe check your Instagram DMs. Maybe the guy with the yacht." Sarah stood up. She walked over to where Jessica was sitting. "So," Sarah said softly, "attempted extortion, fraud, violation of an NDA, and let's not forget, trying to pass off a stranger's child as an heir to the Sterling estate." Sarah leaned down, her face inches from Jessica's. "You didn't win, Jessica. You just dug your own grave." Jessica grabbed her bag, her hands shaking uncontrollably. I have to go." "Sit down," Sarah barked. Jessica sat. "You aren't going anywhere until the police arrive," Sarah said. "I wasn't going to press charges for the earrings, but for trying to leverage a child to steal from my family, I'm going to make sure you give birth in a prison infirmary." Jessica burst into tears, loud, ugly sobs that echoed in the sterile conference room. On the screen, Daniel watched, his face a mask of regret. He realized now that both women were lost to him. One because he betrayed her, and one because she was never his to begin with. The fallout was swift and brutal. Jessica was arrested in the lobby of the law firm, faced with the overwhelming evidence of fraud and extortion, plus the previous theft of the earrings. She took a plea deal. She received probation and a hefty fine, but her reputation was destroyed. She moved back to her hometown, far away from the high society she had tried so desperately to infiltrate. Daniel signed the divorce papers the next day. He didn't fight for more money. He didn't fight for the apartment. He signed in silence, his spirit finally broken by the weight of his own lies. He stayed at the warehouse for another year, working his way up to shift manager, a humbled, quieter man who finally learned the value of $1, though he would never again enjoy the millions he had squandered. And Sarah, the final scene of our story takes place 6 months later. The setting is the same dining room where the nightmare began, but the atmosphere is different. The heavy curtains are pulled back, letting sunlight stream in. The table is set with fresh flowers, bright, vibrant tulips, not the stiff white lilies of the past. Arthur sat at the end of the table, looking healthier than he had in years. Evelyn sat in her usual spot, but she looked relaxed. She was drinking tea, not wine, and at the head of the table sat Sarah. The doors opened, and Claire walked in. She wasn't holding a vodka tonic. She was holding a tablet. "Quarterly numbers are in. Sarah," Claire said. Sitting down. "Profits are up 15%. The new logistics strategy you implemented is working." "Excellent," Sarah said, reviewing the data on her own screen. "We should approve the bonus structure for the warehouse staff. They've earned it." Evelyn watched her daughter-in-law now, just her daughter in spirit, with a look of intense pride. "You know," Evelyn said, placing her teacup down, "I was worried. After the divorce, I thought the house might feel empty." Sarah looked up. She smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. She looked younger, lighter, as if a heavy coat had been taken off her shoulders. "It's not empty, Evelyn," Sarah said. "It's peaceful. There's a difference." "True," Evelyn nodded. "But surely you don't intend to live alone in this fortress forever. You're young, you're beautiful, and now you're one of the wealthiest women in the state." Sarah laughed. "Are you trying to set me up, Evelyn?" "I'm just saying." Evelyn shrugged. "The new legal counsel we hired, Mr. Thorne, he's very sharp, and he asked about you." Sarah blushed, just slightly. "We'll see. For now, I'm enjoying being married to the only thing that has never let me down." "The company," Claire guessed. "Myself," Sarah corrected. She stood up, walking to the window. She looked out over the sprawling estate, the lawn where she used to cry, the guest cottage where her ex-husband used to live, the driveway where Jessica had tried to destroy her. It was all hers now, not because she married into it, but because she had fought for it. She had walked through the fire of betrayal, public humiliation, and heartbreak, and she had come out the other side not as a victim, but as iron. She turned back to the two women who were her real family. "Dinner is served," Sarah said, and for the first time in 10 years, the soup didn't taste bitter. It tasted like victory. And that is how Sarah Sterling went from the quiet wife in the corner to the queen of the empire. She didn't just divorce a toxic husband. She outsmarted a gold-digging mistress and took control of her own destiny. It's a brutal reminder. Be careful who you insult at the dinner table, because you never know who is actually signing the checks. If you loved seeing karma hit instantly, make sure to hit that like button. And if you want more stories of betrayal, revenge, and sweet justice, subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what happens next. See you in the next video.